Thanks very much to Mr. Tyrrell, who took us through the process of getting our necks prepared. And looking at all your prepared necks, you've certainly done a good job in gluing up. The next stage is a complex stage, but like anything, if you follow a process, you'll get a good outcome. And I just want to take you through that process this morning. The first thing I'm going to get you to do is to actually find the centre of your neck. Most necks are symmetrical, both halves are equal, although the head of your neck might look a little different depending on the planning that you've done in your folio work. But let's just start by finding the centre of our neck. This is 70 mil, so I'm just going to draw a centre line at 35 mil all the way through. You might want to get one of your buddies to give you a hand just to hold the rule in the right spot so you can mark that centre line as accurately as possible. Once you've got your centre line, we have prepared, pre-prepared I guess, a couple of templates. But as I said earlier, the templates are just your standard templates, and these are just made out of Perspex. And I don't know whether you can see, but I reckon one side of this template is different from the other side. So if I was using this template, I would actually find the centre of this template, and I'll just do that quickly. Put a centre line there, and I put a centre line here, 22.5, and run a line up the middle. And I would use 1/2 of my template, and I would line this up with my centre line on my neck, and I would trace, I'd line this end up with the other side, I would trace 1/2 and flip it over and trace the other half. So we've marked the top of our neck with our template. But just to remind you one more time, the head of your neck is more than likely going to be different from this one. So prior to doing the cutting for your neck, we need to make sure that you have made a template for this section of your neck. And I know a number of you have come up with some creative shapes, and that's what we need to make a template of. The other thing that's really important is the profile template. And again, we have made a template for that profile, and that will need to sit on the side of your neck, and that will need to be traced very, very carefully. So what I'm doing is I'm making sure I'm lining up this heel of the template with as close as I can to the face. So I'm only minimising how much I'm removing, but I'm making sure that I'm removing an amount of material all the way around. And I would go around and hold my template firmly, trace it off and mark it as carefully as I can with my pencil. Again, you might find that you need one of your buddies in the class to actually assist you in holding the template while you actually trace it off. Looks like I've missed a bit there, so always make sure that you've got everything traced off properly. If you move things, it often changes its look. So you can actually see where I've marked off that template, which gives us a good guide of what we're going to cut out. So for this example, I'm just going to stick to the traditional shape of a neck. So I've gone into the back room and I've cut the neck out with the bandsaw, and I've also cut the profile of the neck on the bandsaw. So I have the face cut out to this profile shape, this template shape, and I'll have the side cut out using this template shape. And as you can see, we've minimised the amount of material quite significantly, but it's still pretty rough. And now comes the complex process of shaping this into a beautifully finished neck that you will mount to the body of your ukulele. Shaping. You need to have some guidelines to assist you in the shaping process. What I would often do is I would give myself a series of lines that I work to, and those lines would be 10 mil in from the outside edge. Because I do a fair bit of this, my use of my finger as a guide works reasonably well for me. It might not work as well for you. If that's the case, one of our marking gauges, we've removed the spur, we've drilled a hole, and we've drilled a hole to enable us to insert a pencil in it. And we can actually set the distance between the pencil and the stock to 10 mil and use that as our guide method to get a nice parallel line. So by all means, if you're not confident enough to use your finger at this stage, go ahead and use the marking gauge, or go back to the traditional way of measuring and drawing a line. But it gives you a bit of a guideline of where you should be working to, and that way you're keeping everything nice and symmetrical. The first thing I reckon I would get you to do is to start to shape the back of the neck. We've got a saddle that Mr. Robinson's prepared for us that enables us to clamp our neck and support our neck in place with a couple of clamps. So we have a couple of clamps, we can clamp our work in place. So we're not trying to hold it and we're not trying to put it in the vise and putting pressure on the joints that we've made on our neck in an inappropriate way and causing the possibility of breaking our neck where we don't want to break it. So I've clamped it down and I haven't put full pressure on it yet, and I'm just checking to make sure that it's sitting correctly. If I've got my neck too high or too low, I might be putting undue pressure on parts of my neck when I come to clamp it down. So that's going to work well for me. It's going to bottom out at the 2 points that I'm clamping, so I can just make sure that that is clamped nice and firmly and it's sitting there really well. Now we're going to look at shaping. And we have a couple of different tools that I will introduce you to. Some of them you'll be familiar with from previous years in doing technology studies, but I doubt whether this one you'll be familiar with. This is one that the Japanese have developed. It's made from a series, I guess, of hacksaw blades. One side of the hacksaw blade is coarser than the other side, given that one side of the file is then going to be coarser than the other side. So this is quite an aggressive file and you will remove a lot of material. Don't be fooled by thinking removing material quickly is going to get you a good result. You need to be concentrating and be aware of what you're removing. Sometimes going to a too aggressive tool can take too much material off too quickly, and then it becomes more difficult to repair. I take you through a series of tools to make your life easier. If I said to you, let's just get a bit of sandpaper now and we'll just sand it down and shape it, it would take you forever. So what we're doing is we're using a coarse Japanese file, or perhaps a rasp, which is quite aggressive in its teeth, to remove a bit more material first of all. Then we're using a finer file, this is a bastard file, that will take out any of the coarse file marks that either the Japanese file or the rasp leaves. And then the sandpaper, of course, and we'll work our way through the grits of the sandpaper, will then remove any file marks. So there is method in our madness in terms of taking you through a process. I watch kids file sometimes, and I'm just going to start with the fine side of the Japanese rasp. And sometimes you get kids what we call draw filing, where we're moving the file from side to side. That will remove material, but what you need to be doing is filing across. So it's that action, but you're not working in one spot, you're working along your neck. Obviously, this is just a square-edged Japanese file, and this is a curved edge, so you won't be able to get too high on this curve. So we would remove, and I'm looking at this line and this line, making sure that I'm just removing that part of the material. Once I'm happy with that side, I would lift the saddle out of the vise, which is going to be a bit complex the way I've clamped it. So I might need to loosen my clamp and re-clamp it with the clamp on the other side. Again, checking to make sure that I'm not putting undue pressure on things. And then I would work on this side the same way, with starting with the Japanese file or the rasp. These are expensive. We've only got a couple of these. I think they're $60 or $70 each. So they'll need to be shared around so you get you become familiar with how they work. I'm going to go back into the other side just to take you through how you'd use a rasp. And if you notice, the rasp and the bastard file are what we call a half round file. And the half round works really well on these particular shoulders. So I can roll the file and work through there. Now I'm finding this quite coarse, so I might need to go to a bastard file to remove that material. But can you see how I'm pushing that way and rolling at the same time? If I just go like that, I won't get the same sort of finish I want. And then I can go to the flat side and I can work my way around. What I'm trying to do here, so I'm not getting just a straight cut, is I'm trying to roll at the same time. So I want a nice gentle roll on the back of my neck. So what you can see here is that I have done a fair bit of shaping. It is a very tactile process, and what I mean by that, it involves a fair bit of touch. You want to see how that feels in your hand, remembering that you're probably going to have, you know, a 5-6 mil thick fretboard sitting on the top of there. So I could probably go much thinner on the sides than I have gone so far, remembering I marked a 10 mil line. I would then go about marking another line, because I think it's important to have reference points that you can work to, so you don't get yourself in a muddle and take too much off on one side and not on the other. And again, pencil, marking gauge or ruler. Some parts are going to be much harder to shape than other parts. Essentially, this is end grain of timber, which is much harder than side grain. So this will take a lot more effort and a lot more care. As we had a template with this, you will notice on a number of ukuleles when you've done your research that the heel of the neck can vary in shape quite significantly. Some of them look really nice where they become thicker here and then tapered to a thinner section at the bottom. So think about that shape, and we might assist you in making up a template that gives you the shape of that heel. And then we would go through the process of using the rasp and the file to clean that up. That's not too bad, using a bastard file, that's reasonably clean. I would now, if I was happy, and I'm not completely happy with the shape, but if I was happy, I would move to an 80 grit sandpaper, folding my sandpaper in 3 so it doesn't slip on itself. Folding it in 2, it just slips, and I would put it back in the saddle, clamp it again, and start to clean it up. Always shaping, continually shaping as you go, working on that neck to get the shape that you're really aiming for. I'm going to take you through the process of shaping this part of your neck. And I know a number of you will have different ideas with how you want this to be. What I've done is I've marked an arc at the top, and the reason I've picked an arc is that I want it to complement the arcs that I have in the body of my ukulele. I'm not removing a great deal of material, and I need to be conscious of where my tuning pegs are going to go, so I'm not cutting into any of that space. How I remove that material is by using a coping saw. Now, I'm not sure whether you can see from there, but I have two coping saws, one with the teeth pointing down and one with the teeth pointing up. And these are fairly fine-toothed coping saws. Now, we're moving to more teeth per inch or per 25.4 millimetres than we have in the past, which gives you a much finer cut. Some of my colleagues prefer to have the coping saw teeth pointing up because they prefer to use the coping saw to cut on the push stroke. I've always put the teeth pointing down towards the handle because personally I've felt that I've had more control on the pull stroke. So I'm going to select this one with the teeth pointing down. They're easy enough to change. All you need to do is they're springy, you can push it in against the bench, take the blade out and switch it around. Again, you need to think about how you're clamping your neck. I don't want to put a lot of pressure on my glue joints. So for this exercise, I'm just going to see how I'm going to go. I'm just putting pressure through the heel because I know that's square. And as I say, it's on the pull stroke. And I'm just going to very lightly and on the outside of my pencil line remove the waste material. You can see how I'm supporting the neck. If I go really aggressively, I'm putting a lot of pressure and I could damage my neck. So just be really careful that you're not putting a lot of pressure on the blade when you're cutting and a lot of pressure on the neck. So I'm supporting the neck and I'm not pushing hard on my blade. I'm working on the outside of my line and I'm just doing a slow cut and I'm working with the full length, as much as possible, the full length of my blade. This will take a bit of time and we'll work our way completely around until we've removed all our waste material. So the shape of the head is probably really important to the shape of your body and your design. So make sure you've done your research, you're thorough with what you want out of your design, because it's really hard to add timber back to what you removed. So I've still got a long way to go to get my neck the way I want it to be. But this should show you the process that you need to go through. You need to follow, you need to be patient and you need to persevere. And if we've got our templates right, we've got our patterns right, and we're following a series of lines, the end result will be exactly how you want it. So good luck and keep persevering.